Welcome back to another episode of Curveballs and Lemonade. I'm your host, Judy Kogan. Today's guest is Rachel Milman. Rachel is a mom, wife, daughter, sister, aunt, friend, and she's also a special needs and educational attorney. Rachel's here today to talk about her early life curveball that helped shape who she is and her career path, and how she now helps others who have experienced their own curveballs. Let's dive right in. Hi, Rachel. Welcome to Curveballs and Lemonade.
Hey, Judy.
Thanks for coming on. Let's dive right in. You experienced a curveball pretty early in life that changed everything for you and shaped your career path. Let's talk a little bit about that first.
Yeah. So when I was very young, 5 years of age, my father passed away, and it's actually very interesting. He died very young. And at this point in my life, I actually happened to be the age that he passed away at. So this is such a meaningful year for me, particularly in relation to his passing.
Wow. Okay. And so then how did his passing impact your career path choice, which is to go to law school, become an attorney? Um, yeah.
Yeah. So the night my dad passed away, um, my mom had taken him to the doctor. He was complaining a lot of arm pain, and he played sports. But my mom took him to the doctor, and they're like, "Oh, you just pulled your muscle at the gym. Here's some painkillers. Go home. And if the pain really kicks up in the middle of the night, go ahead and take some pills."
And they sent him home and went on his way.
They sent him on his home, went on his way, and woke up the next morning to my mom screaming because he was dead.
Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry about that. That's a lot to deal with as a 5-year-old. So I'm assuming that there was some litigation involved in that process, which inspired you to then go to law school.
Yeah, so I mean, from that moment on in my life, I just thought, wow, that doctor completely screwed up. And, obviously the thought process is if they would have realized he was having a heart attack at the time he came to the hospital that night complaining of pain, um, then they may have been able to save him, right? Like in theory, they could have started whatever medicines needed to be given to him, held him overnight for monitoring, just any of those processes to be put in place. So I really feel like um, myself as a child and my siblings, as well as my mom, really got the short end of the stick in life because, while I was 5 years old and I didn't really realize what was going on at the time. I think as I've aged and as I've become closer to my mom, and now as I'm the age that my mom was when my dad passed away, the age my dad was as well, I could really understand the import of that. Just like my mom, I have 3 kids. And I'm just thinking like, wow, she really got shafted. I got shafted. But although, like, the truth is that I don't remember having a father in my life. So I guess it's sort of like ignorance is bliss. You don't know what you missed. But
Aw.
nonetheless, I always felt this need for justice as a result of that. Um, I don't think my mom received justice, even though there was some litigation surrounding that case. There was no justice because my dad is not here and my mom's forever partner is not here. And the person that was supposed to be my, someone I looked up to is not here to guide me and be my path forward. But yes, I mean, I think that was the first part of my life where I thought, okay, justice has to be made.
Yeah. And not to mention that you grew up without a father, your kids don't know their grandfather, um, all of that. Okay, so fast forward, you went to college, then you went to law school. What happened after law school?
Well, okay, so there's a little bit in between there. So,
Okay.
I mean, we
Yes.
did these projects when I was in elementary school. And even from like fifth grade, I remember holding a sign in my quad saying, I'm going to be a lawyer when I grow up, right? Like it was like a professions day and you had to indicate what you wanted to. So I've always known that was my path. during law school, I worked at the DA's office. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so sexy. Seeing all of these dead bodies, seeing all of the crime scenes, reading it. Like I was so intrigued by it. I was like, wow, this is my path. Again, get justice for families, the victims of those crimes. And I'm going to work at the DA's office. Okay. Well, after law school, that didn't really happen because there was essentially a hiring freeze at the DA's office in 2008 when there was the huge market crash. So what was hot at that point was bankruptcy. So I went straight into bankruptcy, then following, basically real estate litigation, litigating loans, and kind of stayed with litigation for approximately 14, 15 years. And it was draining me in every part of my life. During this 15 years of practice, I had 3 children. And with each child, it became more apparent to me that being a litigation attorney was incompatible with having a life and being a mom and being there for my children. I think one of the big things also that was instilled in me is that because my mom was a single parent, she never got to go to any of my school events, 0. So I would always be the kid that was hanging out with the teacher because my mom was working. So that was super important to me when I had children, that I'm an active participant in their life in the sense that I can be, like going and volunteering, which my mom never could do, coming to those middle of the day, classroom events or assemblies or awards ceremonies, whatever it is. I wanted to do that for my kids.
Sure, sure. So you said before that, being real estate and bankruptcy litigator was incompatible with where you were in your life. So take us back to the moment that you decided, I'm going to make this transition from being a litigator to being a special education attorney.
Yeah, so I feel like it was always kind of flowing in my blood. My sister had a pregnancy that was extraordinarily high risk. My nephew had a 10% chance of surviving. My sister had in utero surgery to save him.
Wow.
He was born very prematurely, and he spent a lot of his first year in the hospital and came home finally on oxygen. So um, I always understood the fragility of life, but also that there are complications, even though there's not necessarily a diagnosis. So I watched my sister go through the whole process of getting him supports because he was born so early, because he was delayed because of being born so early. He didn't have that proper development. I also watched my sister kind of change her career as a result of having a child like this. Before, she was a preschool teacher, and then she went into, child development services because she saw how helpful it was for children like her own. So that was always in the background. And then when my children were growing up, my sister was keen to point out, oh, regional center, you could get this service for them. Why not? It's not going to hurt. So that was interesting. And I realized pretty quickly that regional center is not so willing to offer services.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's interesting. Isn't this like their right? Isn't this your right under California law, that you are entitled to these services, that if, that your child should get the services that they need to,
Yeah.
m- I guess, progress in life? So I realized pretty early that that was a bit of a challenge. And then once I had my third child, I was kind of at a breaking point. I was kind of at a point where, like, I can't go back to being a litigation attorney. I can't go back to that. It was either quit the legal field altogether or move
Hmm.
forward in a path where I felt that I could help people in a way that wasn't so mentally destructive in terms of like keeping me up at night and bringing the work home and having a bad day because opposing counsel was having a bad day and they decided to take it out on me. So I really chose to pivot once my third was born and see if there was and also I should add that, in the real estate litigation, in the business litigation, in the bankruptcy litigation, I really never felt fulfilled ever. And that was also part of the reason, like, I kind of was done and I wanted out. It was just taking so much mental space up for me and I wasn't enjoying it. So I wanted to shift to something that I would enjoy. And I thought that would ultimately be something outside the law. But then I found the regional center and special education and saw how hard it was to obtain services and felt like, okay, you know what? If this is hard for me and I'm a litigation attorney, this must be hard for an average parent that's not a litigation attorney. So it just really changed my fervor to do something that could be more impactful.
Great. Um, I always say when I have conversations with other parents who kind of don't understand what I mean when I talk about regional center services or special education services, I always say to them, consider yourself lucky if you don't know what that is. And also consider yourself lucky if you know what it is, but you've never needed an advocate on your side because your team is perfect, whether that's the regional center team or the special education team. Now, we know that never happens, of course. So let's, for those of us who are not us, because I do know what this is, but for the listeners who aren't familiar with what regional center is, and for the listeners who aren't familiar with how special education works, let's dive a little bit into those. Let's start with regional center. Can you walk us through what regional center is? You touched on it a little bit, and why families might need an advocate like you, and then more specifically, we'll get to the independent facilitator piece. Let's talk about what regional center is and why families might need someone like you on their side.
Yeah, so I think there's a big misconception about what regional center is, and I really do want to talk about that. So there is the early childhood division of regional center, which is 3 and under, and that's that's it's very strange, but for some reason it kind of changes after 3, and I'll go into that because that's sort of when the school district is supposed to take over.
Right.
So under 3, regional center will provide things like speech therapy and occupational therapy and all of the supports that are therapy. After 3 years old, when you're going into what they call school age, they're looking for other generic resources such as the school district or private insurance and then they do look at that, under 3, they do look at private insurance and generic resources, but it's just so much easier to get uh, the therapy services.
Yeah.
But over 3, you're really looking more at the function of the regional center is to give you the best life possible. So what does that mean? That's a very broad statement. That means being involved in the community, being able to function in the community, being able to live on your own eventually, having the skill sets needed in life to be successful without um, with with the hope that you're not going to go live in an institution and need to be cared for 24 hours a day.
Just a follow up to that is, why might a family need an advocate such as yourself to help them sort of access all of those really important services? And whether it's under 3 or over 3, why might someone need someone like you?
So I think this is my unofficial opinion. There's a lot of paperwork involved with each service that is crafted or given to you by the regional center. So I will say regional centers are historically completely understaffed and overworked and assign more cases than they could ever complete or work on or actually help the parents on. So I think as a result, unfortunately, and this is not, to badmouth them, it's that unfortunately they just don't have the bandwidth. So they're trying to offer or give you as little services as you ask for. And not necessarily, they're supposed to be your instructors and they're supposed to tell you every service available to you and whether you qualify or not. In practice, that doesn't really happen because of their bandwidth. They just don't have the
Yeah.
bandwidth. I don't think it's ill-intentioned. I don't think that they're trying to screw you out of services. I think they just don't have the bandwidth to do all the paperwork associated with each service that
Yeah.
your child qualifies for. So you don't know what you don't know. And someone like me does know what you don't know. And I would be, I essentially step into the shoes of the regional center coordinator and advise you of what the regional center coordinator should be telling you is available for you.
Right. Based on what your child's needs are.
Correct.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit and kind of give an overview of the special education system. So, can you talk a little bit about, what an IEP is, what that process looks like, and then I'll have some follow up.
Yeah. So you generally hear about an IEP. Most parents that are involved in regional center will generally hear about what's called an IEP, an individual educational plan, around 2.5 years old because they're about to age out of early childhood regional center services. So regional center is really looking to pass the buck off to the next generic resource, which would be the school district. So they're very eager to hook you up with the local school district, get evaluated, and get an IEP in place for your child. Um, that IEP is supposed to be individualized to your child. Okay. Is it always? No. What kills me, I think, the most out of the IEP system is that there's these canned goals that they look to in their system, and they say, "Okay, we got this out of what's called Welligit," and that's their system that they use to kind of like their database for IEPs and kind of how they structure them. And I, you know, I'm often saying in an IEP, okay, I understand that came out of Willigent. It is a canned goal, but that doesn't work for my client's needs. So I think that's a huge, that's one of the
Yeah.
biggest problems is that they're always trying to fit a round peg into a square part. It just doesn't work. But it's easier for them. Again, so I think this is, again, district employees, they're very overloaded. You're getting a speech therapist that may not even be able to deliver services to all of her IEP caseload, which is the law. She has to, or he has to. But they don't have enough bandwidth. They don't have enough time in their day. So
Yeah.
I think that some, IEP teams are more willing to work on what is in the best needs of the individual. Others are like, well, we could only offer 30 minutes because that's all we got. That's all we have.
Yeah, I often hear schools say, or parents say that schools say, we don't have the resources to offer what you're asking for, which is similar to all we're going to offer you is 30 minutes. That's all we got. Um, it doesn't seem individualized to me, but often schools do say that. Can you tell us without providing legal advice, like what does the law really say about a school's legal right to say we don't have that. We can't provide that. We don't provide that resource.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the best answer to that is not my problem. That because the law says they have to provide it. So I
Yeah.
don't care if you don't have enough staff. Hire somebody. Get an MPA to do this service. That might, I don't care. It's not my problem. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of parents are afraid to say that because they want to have a great relationship with the IEP team, but they don't understand that great relationship is at the disadvantage of their child who's not getting the services because that IEP team doesn't have the bandwidth.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Most parents, I think, go into an IEP, or at least like early on, going into an IEP thinking like, okay, everyone here is on my team. They're here to help my child. That's why we're here. Um, Unfortunately, more often than not, that's not the case. And so, when does sort of that illusion break and parents realize, oh, these people who I thought were on my team are
Mhm.
actually not on my team?
So I think it depends. I think some parents may not understand their child's needs. And so sometimes you have an amazing team that's telling them, okay, these are services that your child needs. And off the record, I'm not able to give those to your child. So you're going to have to hire somebody for due process if you want these services. But I think your child needs them, right? So that there's actually the teachers that admit it behind the scenes to the parents, right?
Yeah.
There's also the times where you're calling me every single day because my child is hitting other children and they're using bad language and therefore you want me to pick them up, but you're not going to give them a one-to-one because you don't want to fund that. And you just want me to keep picking up my kid when their disability is causing all these issues and you're not supporting them properly, right? So I think, for some, you figure it out earlier than later. And for others, they talk to their friends like, hey, I don't necessarily have a problem, but I don't know what to expect. I think that's the best thing you can do is do market research. Talk to other families in the community. Hey, if your child has a diagnosis, did you go to your first IEP with an attorney? Doesn't that seem like really aggressive? Again, I think it's what the parents are willing to accept. I don't think it is aggressive. My job is not to make anyone feel uncomfortable in the meeting. It's to make sure that the child gets the appropriate supports. So I'm not coming in there, with like fully on guard, ready to fight and choke someone out. I'm just going there to ensure that the law is followed and the child gets the services they're entitled to.
Sure. Yeah. Um, Speaking of going into an IEP meeting, what do you think the most common mistake parents make, like well-meaning parents make when they go into a meeting? Not out of bad intent by any means, but just not out of not knowing what the process is.
I think it's that the team has your best interests at heart. I mean, I want to say the team does have your best interests at heart, but it doesn't always, translate because of their inability to provide those services. I
Yeah.
think that a lot of parents believe that they have to sign the IEP in agreement right then and there, or that's it. Like that's their one shot only, that they have to sign it at the end of the IEP meeting agreeing. Even if they don't agree, they don't know that they can't. That they have a right not to agree. So I think it's this misconception that you have to agree on the spot.
Yeah. I think that some IEP teams sort of
Make it seem
strong
that way.
arm or,
Yeah.
yeah, they force parents into agreeing because they want to check that box in Welligent and move on to the next one. And when it's really not in the child's interest or best interest. And not that those things can't be unraveled, but it takes a lot, obviously, to
Well, yeah,
undo
it
that.
it takes a lot more money for a client to call me after they've made the mistake than to just bring me on from the beginning. I find that we spend a lot less money and a lot less time and effort, getting it right from the beginning as opposed to undoing it.
Yeah. Let's talk about when you do get a phone call, you get phone calls, I assume, from parents kind of at every stage, right? So, first diagnosis before they even have an IEP or even had any type of assessment from the school district. Some where they're sort of, having maybe their annual IEP and want to change things from the prior year, or some where they've just been fighting with the school at every way. Like, where do you I guess where do you see most of the contact coming in for you to come in and help? Um, yeah, typically where do you see it? And then as a follow-up to that, when do you when do you wish parents would come see you? At what point in the process?
So I always wish that parents come see me right after they get the diagnosis because I'm so much more than just giving them, access to services from regional center or the IEP team. I actually help them build their team. So I think there's a lot of value in consulting someone like me very early on, right when you get the diagnosis. And I also feel really a lot of pride in getting that started for a family that's completely lost and doesn't know what to do. They've got this diagnosis, you have no handbook. It's like, here, your child has autism, figure it out. So I think I love that. That's really satisfying for me on a professional level and really helpful to the family who's just treading in uncharted territory here. But I find so again, like this goes back to my market research point. If you've talked to a lot of parents in the world, in this world, they're going to say, yeah, consult with somebody immediately. Um, so I do get a lot of parents that are fresh out of the gate. They don't even know why they're calling me, but their friend told them to call me because they have a diagnosis. And, they always ask me like, explain to me, what you can do for me. And it's like, well, I'm glad you found me. It's not necessarily what I could do for you. It may or may not be. I'm not going to guarantee you anything, but I'm going to guide you along the way so that it's a little less stressful for you. Um, but I often get parents where school has not worked for many, many, many years. They've tried it on their own, and the school says, your kid's fine. Your kid's fine. There's no problem here. We're just going to we're going to change this or maybe put his seat somewhere else. Or, you know what, he could take tests in a different room and it's fine. He's fine. Um, I also get clients that I'll give you one case in point. I get clients that tell me, I think something's wrong with this placement. I can't quite put my finger on it, but we don't have money for private school. Can you help us with a better placement, or can you help us get this placement so that it actually works for our child? So it's not necessarily they've fought with the school. They just have this inclination that something is off and they can't quite decode what's happening. As the child gets older, you're on campus less if you volunteer as a parent. You have a lot less oversight of what's going on. But maybe your kid's coming home and they're very irritable, or, your kid's coming home and they're somewhat depressed and just sitting in their room. And you can't quite get to some understanding as to why that's happening. Oftentimes, behavior alone speaks for itself. Something is not working if the child is having certain behaviors. Maybe not for every child. A child could just have some behavioral dysregulation, but a lot of times children that are unable to verbalize, despite even if they're verbal, they might not be able to verbalize exactly what's eating at them. You have to kind of figure that out for yourself. And that parents come to me where it's like, my kid just doesn't want to go to school anymore. Like, what do I do? We've never had any problems before. And so that's where I start diving a little bit deeper and trying to understand, does your child have an IEP? Does your child have a diagnosis? Has this ever happened before? I ask a lot of questions. I gather a lot of information from my clients to try to understand what exactly is going on. And to the extent the parent doesn't know, then I would call a meeting with the faculty or the APEIS or the specific teacher that's at issue. So there's so many different scenarios, but generally behavior is really at the threshold of parents understanding something isn't quite right.
Yeah, absolutely. You've seen cases where parents fight really hard to get their kid or to keep their kid in a certain program or with a certain service, and the school is actively resistant against that, against what the parent is advocating for. Can you touch upon what's the emotional logic behind a parent who is whether it's actively insisting or even passively insisting that their child stay in a program that their behavior is showing that it's clearly not the right program or placement for them?
I think a lot there's so many components of that, but I think a lot of the time it's convenience. Maybe another sibling goes to that same school and it's just
Yeah.
easier for all the children to go to one school together. I think there may be different behaviors at school than there are at home. And so at home they're not exhibiting these problems, but at school they are. Um, I think that there are parents that really don't know what their children's needs are because they're not at school with their children.
Yeah.
And so they kind of take it with a grain of salt, like, oh, really? My child's doing that? They don't, nah, that's not my child. And some parents just want their children to be normal, right? They want their children to be normal. They want their children to be successful. And taking them out of a school that's like the normal placement could be, a lot of internal strife for a parent.
Yeah. Um, you talked a little bit about how behavior kind of is an indicator that maybe the child is not in the right place, whether or not they can verbalize it, or um, whether they're verbal but can't necessarily articulate exactly what's going on. Um, are there any other indicators that a school really can't support a child being there? So, for example, earlier you talked about phone calls, get to pick up the child, academics. What other indicators, in addition to behavior, would show that a change of placement is probably warranted?
Well, okay, so there are situations where a child has an AAC device, and the parent, one of the parent's primary goals is for the child to be um, in a general education class with children that are verbal and want them to socialize. I think it could happen. I think it's a tall ask because children are not as nice as adults. I mean, if they can't get what they need out of the child easily, they just move on. And for them, it's not a matter of understanding that that's kind of rude to just walk away when this child is clearly trying to communicate via their AAC or a different mode of communication.
What about academics? If they're struggling academically, that's an indicator too that maybe they're not child is not in the right place.
Yeah, and it could go either way. It's not even struggling academically like at grade level. It could be that they're exceeding grade level and they're so bored in class that they
Sure.
don't know what to do with themselves. So they maybe start, acting out or taking more breaks and going to the bathroom for a prolonged period of time, disrupting other children, or, they may even tell the teacher, like, I'm bored. This is not exciting enough for me. Like, I could do this in 2 seconds. Like, what am I going to do when I'm done in 2 minutes and the rest of the class needs another 30 minutes? So it's not always like the negative of that, right? It's not always that they can't keep up with the coursework. It could be that they're well above the coursework level and then don't know what to do with themselves. So yes, of course, if they can't keep up with the coursework, there's like the initial implementations of like, okay, get pulled out without having an IEP or without having a 504, get pulled out to a small group that needs a little extra support and try to bring them up. But what I'm seeing consistently is that parents are raising the issues pretty early on to teachers. Like, hey, my kid is almost in second grade and they're still not reading. What's going on here? And these teachers like, oh, they'll catch up. They'll catch up. And that may or may not be the case, because if that child has a specific learning disability, continuing on in the regular, like the regular teaching is not going to help them catch up. It's actually going to make the disparity greater. And then the gap is wider. And then, for a child that maybe doesn't have an intellectual disability but has a learning disability, you actually just need to give that kid the right intervention, and then they can catch up, or they can be on the same level as their peers in their grades. So
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Um, let's talk about inclusion. It's a big buzzword for a while now. I don't know. It's been buzzing for maybe close to 10 years. And a lot of parents think that inclusion is sort of, or they demand that inclusion is the civil right of their child, that they must be educated in a general education setting. Um, uh, and that's their right. Um, but that's not always what's in the best interest of the child. And how hard is it to have a conversation with parents that inclusion, at least 100% of the time, might not be in their child's best interest?
look, it's a hard conversation, but I really pride myself on being real with my clients. I don't sugarcoat. I do not lie to my clients. I always tell my clients, this is my thoughts, this is my suggestion, and this is my recommendation. You could choose to follow it. You don't have to follow it. I will advocate for what you think is best, because you're your child's, you know your child the best, and you know what's in the best interest of your child. But I think I'm pretty good about telling my clients, like, you're setting your kid up for failure. I'll support you in this because I know you want it. But it's not necessarily in the best interest of your child to try to force them into a place that's not where they're not making meaningful progress. And a lot of parents, just like teachers, want to wait and see. Oh, they're only 3 years old. Like, how do you know that? Let's wait and see. Let's give them another year to, mature or grow up. Or they're 14 years old and they have no friends, but they're achieving quite well academically, but at lunchtime they like hide in the bathroom. Again, I think this is just, I'm very clear to tell my clients from the get-go, this is clearly not the right placement. And I have to meet the parent where they are. Some parents are willing to accept that and take that at face value. Some parents needed a little bit more time. And I don't hide that from my clients. In other words, I tell them what I think.
Yeah. It's so important, I think, for parents to have that type of advice. It's not just legal advice, it's good advice as a parent who has had a curveball. Their child has a diagnosis or has difficulties that they did not anticipate. They didn't know that parenthood and raising kids would be that way. Um, let's talk about what role grief plays in those situations. We're both parents, so we know what it's like to, have this fairy tale vision of what having kids and raising them would be like. And then all of a sudden, there's a curveball thrown in, and parents have to navigate that. And so, what role do you think grief plays into sort of motivating a parent to fight for something that, you know, might give them a false sense of hope that will help their child, as opposed to, I feel like I'm running on that question, I'm rambling, but what role do you think grief plays in this process?
Well, I want to give you like a real life personal example. Okay. So my oldest daughter, she was in preschool. Okay. She was about 2 3/4. And we took her to the eye doctor, and the eye doctor said she needs glasses. And I was like, she's 2 years old. Like, I'm not giving her glasses. Like, I want her to be perfect. I had glasses when I was young. I hated it. I remembered hating it. And I was just so torn apart about giving her glasses. And then, like, a light came on in my head. And I'm like, are you an idiot? She can't see without the glasses. She's not going to make developmental strides unless she has her glasses. Like, your own ego, my ego of her not being perfect and not having glasses. Nobody else in her class had glasses, right? She's 2 3/4. Like, nobody. It's not, I don't even think anybody in her school had glasses at that time. And so this, like, it was so hard for me on a personal level, my own ego broken, to think that my daughter was anything less than perfect. And you know what? In hindsight, if having glasses at 2 3/4 is the worst that would have befallen me, that's a blessing, right? So I think that I could say that now in hindsight, right? Because I'm past that. And I now have 3 children, and all 3 of my children have glasses. So I think what crushes you in that moment, when you look back on it, it's not necessarily like, haha, you laugh at it, but you kind of realize, like, in that moment, how silly it was. If your child needs those supports, like, they need their glasses to see, and you're preventing them from seeing because you think they don't look as cute with their glasses, like, who are you serving here? Was I serving myself, or was I serving my child? I was definitely serving myself. I just didn't want her to not be perfect. And
Yeah.
I relate that a lot because it was so important. I cried so many tears that she would be the only one wearing glasses in preschool. And I was like, oh, that's it. Her life is ruined forever. And it's like this catastrophizing. And you know what? She's now in fourth grade going on fifth grade, and half of her class has glasses. So guess what? She got them a little bit earlier than the rest of her peers, but she's certainly not the only one at this point. So I think it's perspective. And I think it's just understanding that, yeah, it's not about you, and you're doing a disservice to your child if they're not supported. So you had children, and somehow life doesn't, it's not all about you. It doesn't, you are not the axis that the earth circles upon, right? So I think that's hard to accept.
Super hard. Great advice. And I will note for the listeners that my daughter was in your daughter's preschool class, and I do not remember. When I think of her, I do not think of glasses. I know that's irrelevant now, but I don't. Sometimes I bring that up because sometimes we are so laser focused on how um, this thing about our child is going to be interpreted or seen by, everyone else. And the reality is, I don't even remember her wearing glasses. I just think of a beautiful girl, and her hair was so beautiful. I mean, she's darling. And so our perception is definitely shaded by internally how we feel about it, and not necessarily reflective of how the outside world sees it. But it sounds like you've made some great strides in understanding not only your situation in hindsight, but that really does help you as you advise other families who are going through maybe not a glasses or an eyesight diagnosis, but maybe something more serious that is scary, overwhelming about their child, and you know, confusing, and um, you know, causes a lot of worry. And so for you to have that perspective, I know that's really helpful for your clients. Let's change gears a little bit out of special ed and talk a little bit more about regional center. Um, I know a little bit about it. I know that the self-determination program started a couple of years ago and sort of was a new law in the regional center system. So can you talk about sort of the interplay between services that kids who qualify for can get and how they get them through the SDP process?
Okay, so let me back up just a little bit. So there's regional center, and under regional center, you could go one of two ways. You can go to the self-determination program, or you can do traditional. Okay. In order for you to jump to the self-determination, you still have to take the traditional trajectory. So there's planning, and the planning all has to be approved under the traditional model and then pivots over to self-determination. So it's not like you get into self-determination and you could do all these things that you couldn't do under traditional. It's actually the same law. And I think that's one misconception, is that
Okay.
so if swimming class is approved under traditional, you could also do swimming class in SDP. If social skills is approved in traditional, you could then pick your vendor of choice in SDP. So it's not a different service, right? It is the same service. I think what's great about SDP, what's life-changing about SDP, is that you're not limited to vendors that are vendorized traditionally with regional center. You could pick whichever vendor you want to use. And a lot of vendors that my clients are interested in are not regional center vendors. Why are they not regional center vendors? There's an extraordinary amount of paperwork required to become a regional center vendor. Sometimes the expectation in their pricing is significantly lower by regional center standards. So there's a lot of different reasons, but it gives you that flexibility to pick your own vendors.
Got it. And where do you come into play in that process? How do you help someone that's, I guess, transitioning from the what did you call it again? The
Traditional?
traditional model, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, traditional model to the SDP model. Where do you
Yeah.
come in?
So again, like think of me as stepping into the shoes of the service coordinator. We still, of course, have to get everything approved by the service coordinator under traditional before we could transition into SDP. Each year, we renew the SDP budget. It's the same process. It has to be approved under traditional, and then we move into SDP. So essentially what I do is I step into the shoes of the service coordinator. I talk to my clients. I get to understand the consumer, their child, what the child needs to be successful, and knowing what the regional center can offer to assist with that success. So I advise my clients on what services we should be asking for and help them create like a plan of goals for their child, what's called a person-centered plan, where we talk about the child's needs, the child's goals. And it doesn't have to be a child, by the way. This could be an adult. And it can be a conserved adult. So it is still someone's child, right? So I say child, I'm using that word sort of, across the spectrum, across the board, because I am dealing with adults that can do things for themselves. I'm also dealing with adults that are conserved, and I'm speaking primarily with the parent who knows their needs best. So, yeah, I tell them what services I think would be good for their child to succeed, and then we then present this PCP, this person-centered plan, to the service coordinator and say, based on all of this, this is what we're asking for, essentially. And the service coordinator, it's a whole process. It's a lot of internal red tape, but they take it to their supervisor. Sometimes their supervisor has to take it to clinical. I mean, there's various steps that are involved in getting a go-ahead on the services, for lack of better words.
Now, you mentioned that you step into the shoes of a regional center service coordinator. How does that work exactly? Do you have a title? Are you certified? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my title when I'm working with the regional center would be a certified independent facilitator, meaning that I facilitate the transition. There's so many ways of thinking about it, but I facilitate the transition from traditional services to the self-determination program. I assist the family every step of the way. This is a very arduous process if you're doing it on your own. And if you know anything about regional center, it takes a long time for them to respond. And so a lot of people try it on their own. It's not an essential to have an independent facilitator. I would say it substantially helps clients because they sort of get lost and give up on their own.
Got it. Now, a lot of us have sort of heard rumblings about certain regional center consumers having these like huge budgets, right? There's a lot of talk about that. What advice do you have for parents who are really, focused on having a huge budget, and wanting to like stack their kids' program with tons of services?
Okay, so I will say that a huge budget doesn't necessarily mean the services that you want. So let's say you want adaptive skills, you're not approved for adaptive skills, but you get like an extraordinary amount for Pilates or horseback riding. You're not necessarily going to get that in the spending plan approved for adaptive skills. So again, you can have this huge budget that you're unable to spend. So that's like words of wisdom. Okay. So it's not about the budget size. It's about the services that your child needs, requires, and that can fit into a calendar. So getting
Yeah.
your child programmed for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, it's not healthy for them, in my opinion, because you need some downtime, right? You as a parent need some downtime. Uh, and your child that's been working hard, especially if they're a neurodivergent child in a neurotypical school that's been working hard all day, like 100 times harder than any other student in their class, they may just need some time to come home and be on their iPad or, I said electronics, right? Like, but some kids need that downtime. Some kids need to come
Yeah.
home and just do nothing, actually, just have a snack and just decompress in silence. I don't think that you should just look for a high budget. If your child is legitimately going to participate in 5 hours of dance per week, fantastic. Maybe that's regulating for your child. But 5 hours of dance per week plus another activity after, like when do they sleep? And then you're complaining now that their sleep is so impaired because like their endorphins are running, they're like ready to go because you've hyped them up on so many things that you're not giving this decompression time. And then now you're seeing that there's sleep issues. So that's a huge problem. A lot of children, for example, on the spectrum, or a lot of the children that I work with, sleeping is a huge concern, whether they're taking stimulants that are not wearing off soon enough, or they wake in the middle of the night with stress or anxiety, or they're just too hyped up to fall asleep. I think we just kind of need to take a step back and humanize that it's not, first of all, you're not getting this money deposited into your bank account. It's not like, oh, regional center gave me this huge budget. It's going to my bank account. I could do whatever I want with it. Total misconception. You're hiring a FMS, which is, I call them more of like oh my God, the word escapes me.
An intermediary?
Yeah, like they're an intermediary. I call them sort of like an escrow office, right? Like they
Okay.
take the money from regional center and then they pay out the vendor. So your vendor is oftentimes submitting, or as a general premise, is submitting their invoice for the service they performed, which has to be under DDS guidelines, right? It has to be approved service under DDS guidelines. They're submitting it to the FMS for payments, and then FMS is paying them. It's a financial management company. They're paying the vendor directly, and they're then seeking reimbursement from the regional center for the service that was paid out on behalf of the consumer. So again, like this money is not touching your bank account. If you get a huge budget, you may not be able to spend it, and trying to justify it for subsequent years gets, harder and harder and harder. Like, why would they need to approve a high budget when you're only spending a quarter of it? So I think people have a conception that they're going to spend a lot more money than they can, or alternatively, that they're somehow going to receive that in their bank account and have unfettered access to it, which is totally untrue.
Okay. And then what happens like if you do have a big budget like the next year, and if it's not used, do they does it get shrunken in the process or slashed?
So needs are evaluated every year. So it's not like, so let me give you an example. Like maybe we had a social rec activity approved. But God forbid there was a death in the family, which took them out of state or took them, you know, they had to live with families, so they weren't next to the dance studio, so they couldn't participate in the dance studio. So they were out, they didn't do 6 months of their dance, and that was already funded. So it's not like next year we can't go back and say, okay, no, now we need it for the whole year. And who cares that we didn't use it last year? You know, we have a justification, right? So it's
Okay.
not always like they look at the past and, oh, you didn't use it, therefore you can't have it. It's needs based. So
Okay.
does the child still need dance? And if they do, you know, they'll probably get it, even if they didn't use it last year. But it's like, it's a situation where you have X amount of respite hours per month, and you're using half of those. Maybe there is this extraneous circumstance why you couldn't use all of them. Maybe there is, and maybe there's still a need there. But maybe
Mhm.
there's not. Maybe that need was overestimated initially. And again, so you reassess, is that need continuing for the next year? So it's not always like if they didn't use it, they don't get it, but
Okay.
becomes increasingly harder to justify getting these huge dollar amounts when it's not being utilized. Because if it's not being utilized, they probably don't need it. In other words, that's, you know, it's a circular argument.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I just have a few closing questions for you. Changing gears back to the special education system. What do you wish schools understood about families who are walking through the doors, whether it's their initial IEP or whether they're there for an annual IEP?
So, what I would say is that it's very scary for first time parents. They don't know the lingo, they don't know what they can ask for. Even very experienced parents that have been through this, I don't know, for 8 years, they still don't know what they can ask for. You don't know what you don't know. So, I think the the school district has to be compassionate towards the fact that this is a totally different world that they're entering in. If you just got a diagnosis, like you're scared. You don't know what your child needs. You don't know how to know what your child needs, and you're looking to everybody to help you. You're like a deer in the headlights. Like, please help me because I don't know what to do. And I don't think that's necessarily the approach of all school districts or all special education teams. I think it's more like this is their file. This is, you know, this is just another file on their desk. And this kid either meets the threshold for services or doesn't. And if they don't, it's based on their tests that they're extraordinarily familiar with, but the family might not be. And this is the first time that they're completing this test, the standardized test to measure their scores and to determine whether services are appropriate. So I think it's really just having compassion for the fact that this is not the parents' world. They don't live in it. They don't eat, sleep, and breathe it in terms of the way an assessor does or a person that's delivering the therapy. And they just don't understand it. So give them, kind of be kind, be patient with them. If they don't understand something, it's not necessarily that they're trying to be difficult. They just want to understand it.
That's yeah, really sage advice for any schools that are listening. You talked earlier that you wish that parents would bring you in like early in their diagnosis. Uh, what is the single most important thing a parent can do who receives a diagnosis for their child? Um, what should they be doing? The most important thing in the first 30 days after receiving such a diagnosis?
Talk to friends who have other children with diagnoses, join Facebook groups, join support groups, talk to people in the community. You get such great advice from others that are dealing with this situation in the community. They have the resources. They've been there. They've been in your shoes and they can help you and at least guide you. So, I mean, obviously, my best advice is start interviewing everybody in the community or anybody you could get in touch with online that has a similar situation. That's your best resource. But also get connected with the right people, right? You don't know what service your child needs. Okay. There are professionals that do know what service your child needs. And more therapy is not necessarily the best way of doing things, right? It has to be targeted therapy for what your child needs. So, I mean, I'm not bashing any form of therapy, but maybe your child needs the 40 hours of ABA. Maybe they just need 10 hours, right? So you kind of have to gather an understanding of what's worked for other parents, what professionals in the field recommend, and where does it go? So, you're 6 months into therapy after you got all this advice to do five or 10 therapies, every week, right? Then you reach like a state where you're like, oh my God, this is way too much. I can't do this. I can't sustain life this way. So it's constantly reevaluating what your child needs, where you're at, and what's not going to destroy your family. So I always, I always caution against like doing endless amounts of therapy, because at a certain point, it's very disadvantageous to the family and the family dynamic.
Absolutely. That's great advice. You are a wealth of knowledge, both in the special education arena and in the regional center arena. We could talk for hours about this, but our time is coming to an end. We'll post all of your information on our social media, but just for the listeners, where can people find you if they need you, whether they know they need you or if they even just have a question to see if they might need some advice about how to best to move forward? Where can they find you?
Sure. You could visit my website, milmanlawapc.com, or my Instagram at lawmamamilman, Milman, one L. And, you could call me, 818-681-2710. I'm readily available and happy to help.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This was great. And hopefully you'll be back. We'll talk about another curveball, I'm sure. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to Curveballs and Lemonade. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and subscribe so you never miss a news story. New episodes drop every Thursday. Follow us on Instagram at Curveballs and Lemonade and on Facebook. For audio listeners, make sure to check out full video episodes on YouTube at Curveballs and Lemonade. Engineered by Robert Altschuler, Curveballs and Lemonade is produced by Command Creative Studios.